Welcome back to the Politics and Media Show. Labour MP David Lammy has accused Oxford University of institutional bias against applicants from black and ethnic minority backgrounds. His remarks were a response to the release of figures showing white applicants are twice as likely to get onto some courses at the elite university compared to BME applicants with the same grades. This report came in the same week that the Civil Service Fast Stream programme came under fire for not recruiting a single black Caribbean person in 2011. Let's take a look at this report.
Oxford University is one of the most prestigious in the world, but there are very few non-white faces here, and new figures obtained by the Guardian newspaper appear to give one reason why. The figures showed that white applicants to Oxford were up to twice as likely than their ethnic minority counterparts to get a place on competitive courses like medicine, even with the same A-level results.
Look, I think
Labour MP David Lammy said the figures suggested the university was institutionally biased. Speaking exclusively to Islam Channel, he said the new data meant the difference in success rates could no longer be put down to ethnic minority students applying for more competitive courses.
It is of tremendous concern that so many black, Asian and minority ethnic students are not getting through. Previously we were told because they were concentrating their applications in certain subjects, you know, law, medicine, but actually when we look at the disproportion, it affects all subjects.
Oxford University strongly rejects the allegations of bias, saying it is committed to selecting the best students, regardless of ethnicity. A statement from the university said it was examining the possible reasons for the difference in success rates between applicants of different ethnic groups. It reiterated that the fact certain ethnic minorities apply disproportionately to the most competitive courses affected their chances of success. But it said it had never claimed this was the only reason for the disparity. It added that the university did not know students' A-level grades when they applied, and that performance in aptitude tests, GCSEs and interviews should be looked into as possible factors. David Lammy admitted the disproportional success of white applicants could be down to their performance at interviews and tests. But he said how you performed in these tests was often affected by your background.
The question is, how do you judge excellence? And is it fair to get children, often Muslim, Bangladeshi, black, in an urban context, so they're from poorer backgrounds as well, to jump through hoops that other children, most often white, most often middle class, can be prepped and prepared for.
So, is it time for change at Oxford, or should students accept that the application process is what it is? It's a hotly debated question, both inside and outside the walls of this great university. Emily Churchill, Islam Channel.
Well, with me to discuss the issues are Professor Gus John, Honorary Fellow of the Institute of Education at the University of London, and Dr. Raveem Ismail, who is a former physics student at Oxford University and a committee member of the Oxford Muslim Alumni. Welcome to the programme, both of you. Gus, so long story here with Oxford University. What do you make of this report?
It's not surprising. In 1994, when I was Director of Education in the London Borough of Hackney, I was invited by admissions tutors at Oxford to present at a conference at Keble College, looking at issues of basically how to widen access for students from inner city schools. And the sorts of issues that David Lammy was talking about in your package are precisely the kinds of issues we were discussing in 1994. I believe that at the root of all of this is the whole issue of what we call social and cultural capital. Lammy made reference to that. I don't believe that you can assume that because young people from inner city areas of whatever ethnicity, white or anything else, have got dazzling A-level results, that they would necessarily get on at Oxford in a manner that the majority of people who go there from private schools and have had all of that stuff with parents, friends and relatives, and that whole social milieu, that they would actually feel at ease and at home in that environment. And I'm not surprised at the issue of academic outcomes for this reason. The fact that I might have 6 A levels, all with A stars, doesn't necessarily mean that in that environment I won't feel lonely, I won't feel out of place, I won't feel able to do the things that my counterparts do routinely, because they've always done them routinely. So the issue for me really is not so much the academic qualifications, but what precisely goes into the interview. What are people expected to demonstrate through these interviews? And why is it assumed that students who have every right to gain access to Oxford, whether they be from working class backgrounds or otherwise, should be adapting themselves to that environment rather than the other way around?
I mean, Raveem, I mean, you cleared those hurdles, so congratulations to you. But you do realise, I would imagine, that not everybody will.
I mean, that's absolutely true. There's a body of myth surrounding the Oxford interview process, which students are endlessly worried about. Will they throw a rugby ball at me as soon as I walk into the room? Will I have to give an answer that sets the professor's brain on fire? Do I have to sit in a certain way? Do I have to dress in a certain way?
And all these things are true?
Right. Now I can only go by my own experience, and I would say that I was worried about some of these things at the time that I applied for physics. And, all of the extracurricular activities which one is meant to have done, spending every spare minute of one's life doing something useful to get you into Oxford. And, I mean, I just like to do physics. So I remember standing outside my interviewer's room, hearing about him asking the previous student about what he did in his spare time, and I was thinking, my God. And then I went in, and it turned out that all the myths weren't actually true. In my case, I would say, because we just spoke about physics and that was it. So it was very specifically designed to get students to think rather than to regurgitate. Again, in my case and for my subject.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that's something that happens across the board? Because I mean, the picture that Gus paints, I mean, I've certainly heard that from many students who've gone through the Oxford interview process. So, a friend of mine who went to a very prestigious grammar school, very bright girl, went to the interview process. She was the only one from a grammar school, and never mind about anything else. Everybody else was from a private school who was in the pool for the interviews.
I mean, I think there's a large degree of truth in what Professor John says, but for the quantitative subjects and the sciences, I think it's definitely possible to be more objective. And I was at Oxford for 10 years, and speaking to professors and fellow students who ended up interviewing people, the lengths that they went to try and set students at their ease, to try and make sure that that the interview process was as culturally agnostic as possible. They do make an effort. They also know that they can't actually be completely successful in the aura that surrounds the Oxford interview process, and in many cases what interviews themselves see as what the ritual is about. Now in the humanities, it's a different ball game altogether. So the more confident and polished you are, it does help. Although the professors still do try and get behind that, I would hope.
Gus, I mean, do you think there's a process where, for instance, kids at school in Hackney look at this and they're very well aware that what they're heading towards is not just the best education in the country, supposedly, but a process of kind of elite assimilation?
Yeah, I mean, they're joining a club.
Yeah, and that the very idea of that repels them from the start off.
Yes, I mean, I think young people have some legitimate misgivings about that aspect of things, largely because it's a question of values and of choice, isn't it? Whether you want to be part of that social milieu or not. What goes on at Oxford typically doesn't approximate much to the life of an ordinary urban child from a working class background. I mean, my daughter she read Arabic and Middle Eastern Studies at Oxford, enjoyed it thoroughly. She's a very confident young woman. She ended up being the chair of the access scheme to encourage applications from black and ethnic minority people, and again did that pretty successfully. But her conversations with the still relatively few black students who were there were interesting in terms of the kinds of experiences people were sharing about cultural conflicts and attitudinal stuff amongst their colleagues, and indeed amongst some of their lecturers and professors and so on. So I believe that while much more needs to be done to dispel some of those myths that Raveem was talking about, and there are many, and one of the ways of doing that is to have more Oxford graduates, or undergraduates for that matter, visiting state schools, and indeed those students going on the campus there and spending time just demystifying themselves about Oxford and its gleaming spires and all that sort of thing. But having said that, I also believe that there needs to be much more sensitivity to the huge hurdles that people have got to overcome, at least mentally, if they're going to survive in that environment.
Raveem, if I understood you correctly when you were answering before, were you saying that that perhaps in the sort of hard sciences there's a greater kind of weight placed on the purely educational side of it, whereas perhaps in the humanities the whole sort of socialization side of it tends to matter more, or am I misreading what you said?
I think it's easier for a nervous student to perform well on stuff they know in cold, hard maths. And I think that because your confidence and your manner play a part in an answer in the softer social sciences and the humanities, it's therefore possible for people who aren't accustomed to that environment to maybe not do themselves justice. And what Professor John was talking about demystifying, there is nothing that helps so much as knowing somebody who's done it before. So if, for example, and I wasn't in this position, but if I have an older brother who got into Oxbridge, I think if my fool of an older brother can do it, there's nothing to prevent me doing it. So, and at certain schools, the entire teaching staff is Oxbridge. And again, these are people that you've spent a lot of time with, and you realise that they're human. And again, if they can do it, then there's nothing to prevent you. So the contact that's needed between people, often who are the first in their families to go to university, forget about university graduates, but with Oxbridge graduates, I think, would help hugely. And the access scheme is a part of that effort, and part of what we do at the Oxbridge Muslim Alumni is likewise to talk to people of, non-traditional backgrounds at Oxford, people who want to go to Oxbridge who have non-traditional backgrounds, to encourage them that actually it's not as far off as you think, and if you aspire to it, it is possible.
Gus, what do you think the kind of, we've concentrated on these figures that are about the kind of institutional basis, bias on the basis of race. You've talked about this being a broader thing to do with perhaps the way in which any working class student would be approaching it. How do you see these two, the class and the race thing, interacting here in the way that Oxford sort of gets its students?
I think there is a conflation of the two, really. There are issues to do with race and ethnicity, but there are also issues to do with class and cultural assumptions, cultural sensitivity, cultural capital. I used to advise the University of Cambridge at one stage. I assisted them in setting up their race equality advisory group, for example. And one of the important pieces of research we did there was looking at how those students who enter Cambridge through these articulation arrangements colleges in Cambridge have with schools in the East London, Tower Hamlets, Newham, Hackney, etc., how those students who get in there through those routes actually fare when they get to Cambridge. And it was really interesting doing interviews with some of those students. who had either dropped out or were on the verge of dropping out, not because they couldn't cope academically, but because they found the encrusted culture of that place much too much to take. And I don't suppose there were enough props and support systems to assist them in overcoming, making the transition from what they would have been used to, however studious and well applied they were, to what was effectively the core culture within that university. And I think much more time has got to be spent on those sorts of matters. And college tutors, wardens, all of that panoply of bureaucracy have got themselves to think of what kinds of adjustments they need to be making so that the place could be more agreeable to students from inner city backgrounds, whether they be white or black.
I mean, Raveem, when you were saying, I mean, I think it's a good point you say about if you know somebody, your I hope apocryphal elder brother can do it, then I can do it. But how is that ever going to become widespread enough an experience to actually alter it? Because I mean, I agree with the point. It's like when I first learned to type, or you do your driving test. The thought in the back of your mind is, well, millions of people have done this. So however hard I'm finding it, it must be possible. That's a very hard sensation to generate when you are dealing with an elite institution.
Yes. I mean, at the end of the day, people should be encouraged to try. And I remember that at my own interview, my professor said, what we say to people is that actually you're all well qualified enough to come here, really. The thing is, we just don't have enough places for all of you. So 2 out of every 3 of you, we have to turn away. So there is that aspect. And just going back to something Professor John was saying, at some of the interviews, they now encourage people not to wear suits, for example. My younger brother, when he got in for medicine, was told, don't wear a suit. Really, don't bother. We just want to talk to you about medicine. It's not about how you dress. So I suppose they're trying to take a few steps towards setting people at their ease. But does it go far enough? I mean, the post-entry adjustments that students need to make, and again, whether that means that you've got to adjust to become part of a social elite in Britain, that's a much wider question. And I think that it's true that it's possible to experience lots of loneliness at places like Oxford. At university in general, though, I'd say. And Oxford is a very cliquey place where everybody forms their own little groups, and then you basically stay in those small groups sometimes for years.
Or not.
Right. I mean, I was very lucky, I think, in that I found 3 or 4 people that I got on with really well, spoke with until 2 in the morning, and that was me set for the next 3-4 years or so. For people who don't find that, I can see it can be a very, very alienating experience.
I mean, do you think part of the problem is that you can't override this while you have this sort of intense kind of focus on Oxbridge as the leading universities? Doesn't it need to be sort of flattening out or raising up, whichever way you want to look of it, of the university experience, so that it isn't an elite training ground as well as a good education?
Well, I mean, I think you would be asking for the reconstruction of British society, frankly.
I may be.
And I don't think we're going to see that happening anytime soon. I mean, let's face it, there is still the expectation that for the majority of students who go to Oxford, it would be a natural progression from the private schools or whatever else it may be. The private schools themselves are beginning the Springboard Trust that has recently been established, for example, to try and attract more students from inner city areas, disadvantaged students, on full scholarships. And that's proving to be pretty successful. There's a very enterprising and energetic headmaster at Rugby School, for example, who's doing that and doing it very well and has been for the last 10 years or so. It's going to take some time before the private schools begin to adjust to the extent that you see a critical mass of young people from poor backgrounds going into those places, feeling normal, coming out confident and able, and basically trying to get rid of that sort of clammy type of elitism that there is. But I think there's a lot to be said for having a totally different approach to higher education generally. I mean, we talk about Oxford and Cambridge basically as, you know, at the apex of the whole system. But let's remember that these discriminations, etc., are going on at a lower level too. So that if you're a student from one of those post-1992 universities that used to be polytechnics, you're regarded, at least by certain areas of the labor market, as much less worthy, however qualified you may be, than those who go to the Russell Group universities, UCL and Imperial and Bristol and so on. So there's this tiering going on every step of the way. And my concern, which is why I think this discussion is so important, is that the same sort of disadvantages and attitudes to achievement, etc., that you see operating at school level is not being replicated in higher education. And I think that has to be a worry.
Well, Raveem, I mean, that's an important point, that, you know, there's a prehistory to this, to this experience in the school system. And so, I mean, without getting into the entire reconstruction of British society, which I have to admit I have been accused of in the past, if we were to go to the more immediately doable, would a systematic, comprehensive school system level the playing field before we get to the Oxbridge interview process?
It would certainly help. I saw that some of the people who came on the physics course had to do a lot of what I'd already covered at school. And I pitied them that they actually had to learn that stuff for the first time at Oxford, because you've got to do it all by yourself at that stage. And when I was at school, my maths teacher I took 3 maths A-levels, so more maths than anybody else that I knew. And the teacher showed us a book that was given to him at age 16. And in it, there was div, grad, and curl, i.e. differential calculus. You don't cover that stuff until, what, second year university these days now? So the fact is, I mean, I have to say, there's been grade inflation, which means that Oxford and Cambridge can no longer take the A's and the A stars as representing, you know, 3% of the population, hence a decent indicator of what it takes to get into Oxford or Cambridge. What they have to do is they have to add their own often inscrutable process on top of that. And because that process isn't public, there's massive scope for accusations of distortion. So down the line, if it's possible to increase educational standards, encourage students to apply, and to get them socially comfortable. I've heard of a school that set up a room that had, you know, panelling and leather desks and everything, just to get students to practice Oxbridge interviews. And I don't think it was a private school either. I think this was a state school that wanted to get rid of, you know, so some of the artificial barriers that students faced. I think a lot of that would definitely help.
Yeah, I think they do that on the set of Hogwarts as well, so possibly there's an answer to the problem. I'm afraid that's where we're going to have to leave this discussion of Oxford University entrance and its class and racial bias, but I hope that you will be rejoining us for future discussions. I'm sure we'll be revisiting the question of education in this country in future episodes of the Politics and Media programme. Thanks very much for watching.